It's a New Year's Eve edition of the Fenway Rundown. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam alongside. Sean has been mostly off for the last week, enjoying the holidays, but is nice enough for the second time in 10 days or 8 days to join us for a podcast, one of the great workers MassLive has. We want to start by wishing all of you a happy new year, a happy 2025. And we'll obviously have plenty of podcasts down the line, working on lining up a couple of guests, including some people the Red Sox may or may not have acquired so far this offseason. But as of now, just the two of us, and we're going to close 2024 the way that we have most often recorded this show, with the two of us shooting the proverbial fill in the blank there. So, no transactions since we last um, recorded. Actually, that's not true, as the person who was on call on Christmas Eve, the Red Sox did, in fact, make a transaction that day. I walked out of church, looked down at my messages, and saw that they had acquired Giovanni Moran for Mickey Gasper. And that was very tough to see at 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Alas, we wrote the story. We move on. Walker Buehler's official, Patrick Sandoval's official, and Craig Breslow addressed the media yesterday. And so I think, Sean, as we begin the discussion, the real crux of where they are right now is the rotation's done. It's a lot better. We talked about that last week. And now it's all about the search for a bat.
Yeah, which is a considerable need, as we know. It was one at the end of the season. It was obvious that the lineup was too left-handed last year. Excuse me, last year, and having lost Tyler O'Neill to the Orioles, it's become even more lopsided. And part of the problem now, Chris, is that a number of solutions are either off the board or seemingly not getting a lot of attention from the Red Sox. Teoscar Hernández went back to the Dodgers. You and I think, both believed he would have been the perfect solution. If I have a major criticism of the Red Sox so far this offseason, and generally speaking, I would say that they've done a good job. I think the trade for Crochet, the signing of Buehler, the signing of Chapman were all positive baseball developments, but their inability or unwillingness to be more aggressive on Teoscar Hernandez, to me, is a fail. That was a guy that, while he may have had the first choice and preferred going back to the Dodgers, and who wouldn't? They're a glamour team. They're going to go to the NLCS at the very least every year. Why wouldn't you want to stay there? And yet the Dodgers were uncomfortable with the demands. I think if the Red Sox had come in for a bit of an overpay, and I'm talking like 3 years, 75 million instead of 3 years, 66, pay him 25, 24 a year instead of 22, maybe that would have been enough to swing the decision. And that would have been the perfect, as we said prior to the holidays, if they finished up what they had already done by signing Teoscar Hernandez, they would have gotten an A across the board for me for the offseason. I know the goal is, as Craig Breslow said yesterday, is not to win the offseason, but that would have been pretty impressive. Instead, they find themselves still sorely needing a right-handed bat and not a lot to choose from out there.
Yeah, well, I think, you kind of mix that, and I agree, and I've talked about Teoscar Hernandez, and it's funny, and I've mentioned this before, but the two of us were the most anti-Teoscar Hernandez people you could find in the Red Sox space about a year ago at this time, because they had already acquired Tyler O'Neill. He didn't make a lot of sense on the roster, but once it was, well, you could possibly replace Tyler O'Neill with Teoscar Hernandez, I think both of us were all for it. A lot of people were all for it. You heard the comments he said about wanting to play at Fenway. You knew the Red Sox had money to spend and they had interest. From what I've gathered, I don't even know if they made an offer to Teoscar Hernandez.
Doesn't seem like it.
It seems like they were, either resigned to the fact he was going to the Dodgers, had their sights set elsewhere, or were, scared off by the comp pick, which, Buehler did not require a pick to give up. Obviously, Crochet was a trade. Chapman didn't, and they're probably going to get a pick for Pivetta if he signs elsewhere. So do you think they'd be more willing to play in that
Yep.
ballpark? They
Right.
haven't.
And what happened to we've built up the last couple of years and now it's time to go for it. If there were ever a time, and as you noted properly, they will get a pick for Pivetta. He'll sign somewhere.
Right.
and they'll get an offsetting pick to make up for that. So the fact that they're at supplemental pick neutral in that scenario, you've already built up a top 10 farm system. You already have still three of the top 25 or 30 players in minor league ball. You already have greatly overhauled your player development system. If you lost a supplemental pick, so what? What about now our fans have been patient enough. Now it's time to really go for it. Teoscar Hernandez is the picture of going for it and losing a supplemental pick that PS they're going to replace. I, I don't understand the reasoning or the logic at all.
Yeah, I mean, there is the chance that, Teoscar was going to the Dodgers no matter what, and that was clear to every other team. I find that a little hard to believe. As you said, if you offer 3 for 75 or, 3 for 78 or something like that, that just blows him away compared to 3 for 66 with the Dodgers, does that change his mind? Um, it's always worth trying. I don't think it got to that point. Based on what I've heard, I don't think they made an offer to him. And I think the confusing thing is we kind of backtrack on this a few weeks, and it feels like a lot longer than a few weeks with all that's happened. Is they didn't make an offer to Tyler O'Neill either. And, obviously, when you see that move and you see what he got for Baltimore and you say, okay, he had a good year here, he got paid. Baltimore moving in the fences, good fit. He wanted to be there. They were aggressive and signed him, before this market for bats really got moving. To me, those two guys were the best fits on the open market for the Red Sox, Teoscar and then Tyler O'Neill, and a guy can have success here. And the fact that it seems like they didn't make an offer to either is really, really curious and starts, speaking to me that they don't want that outfield type in this whole, search for a right-handed bat.
Well, the problem is when you come out and say, after all that's happened, that getting a right handed bat is still a priority, where does that bat play?
Right.
Is it a
Second
platoon
base.
D?
I mean, really,
I
at
mean,
this
all I
point.
could think of is that they kind of envision a a depth guy like Randall Grichuk as a potential platoon mate for either Wilyer Abreu in right or Masataka Yoshida at DH or both, and you're going to piece it together with platoon advantages. But that was the beauty of having Teoscar Hernandez. He's not a great outfielder, but
And O'Neill, for
certainly
that
at
matter.
home, pardon me?
Or O'Neill, same thing.
Right, right. Although O'Neill had been in the past, he was good enough to win two gold gloves with the Cardinals. I think he was always a better outfielder than Hernandez is. But to me, I almost understand the reluctance to engage with O'Neill because of his unavailability, which I don't care what the injury is. And people say people aren't injury prone. When there's a history over 6 years of playing more than 120 games, what is it, once
Yeah.
in six full major league seasons, that's a concern. And guess what? Guys don't get more durable as they get into their 30s, as O'Neill is going to. So I was even willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that this was why make a multi-year commitment. And this is why I was on the whole qualifying offer to O'Neill, which I still think they should have done. And I don't think that's a contradiction on my part. I would have been very comfortable overpaying for 1 year, knowing that you weren't worried about how available he's going to be as he gets into his mid-30s. 1 year with the incentive to play hard, to go out onto the market again next winter would have been fine. I understand not wanting to go multi-year, but what's the drawback with Teoscar Hernandez, a guy who loves hitting at Fenway, who profiles as that righty pull hitter that could do a lot of damage, and you could at least get by with him in left field on the road at home and figure it out on the road. I don't get it. I think it's a major failing of the offseason.
Uh, when you talk about the available options, obviously I think Alex Bregman's in a different boat. He would play second base for the Red Sox, it seems. He would slot in there. Um, I'm kind of torn on this. I think it's a guy that's been declining, a guy that is not, the player he used to be. And I think adding somebody to the second base mix and locking up that position, it creates kind of a really, really, really crowded mix when you already have that. So you're basically, kind of giving up on, Vaughn Grissom and David Hamilton as everyday players. You have Campbell and you have Meyer coming up. You have Trevor Story in the mix already. You have, all these guys. We can keep going down the line where you feel like you could probably find a second baseman out of that group. I know they've been saying that for like 7 years, but in that group, there's some blue chippers, right? Campbell either taking over, Story moving there for Meyer. We saw Story play elite defense there the year he did it with Bogarts. But I also do see that whole element of the adult in the room, a guy who could be your leader, championship pedigree, some of the intangibles, a guy who will remind Red Sox fans of Pedroia, yada, yada, yada. And I also think the market for Bregman has dried up here a little bit, where the Astros are not going to re-sign him after signing Christian Walker and getting Paredes and what they've done. Some of these other teams, you wonder if a team like Toronto will jump in. It seems like Detroit and AJ Hinch, after a surprise playoff run last year, wants that adult in the room too, and they might be willing to get uncomfortable for the player. He seems like the cleanest fit, but all these other kind of permutations you come up with. Arenado causing all the shuffling, Devers off third, all the stuff we've talked about. Grichuk not being an everyday player, though he had really good numbers last year, especially against lefties, and I think, he does fit the roster as a complementary player. Santander as a guy that I don't think either of us think is a perfect fit with the outfield glut they have. Jerickson Profar, a lot of bad years before a really good year. Versatile switch hitter, but does he really fit in? Pete Alonso, not a guy that really has been linked to the Red Sox at all, and for good reason. They have, Triston Casas at first base. They're apparently not shopping him, which we'll get to as of yesterday. A guy that, to me, makes a lot of sense, and you go on the trade market for him, is Seiya Suzuki in Chicago. He's a guy that's been linked. I think people think he's worse than he is because he got off to a slow start in his first year. Last year, hit 283. 21 homers, 73 RBIs, and 848 OPS. A guy that's, just 29. I think he has, let's see, 2 years left on his contract. You'd have to take on, most of that, 5 for 85. A much better deal than Yoshida, for sure, against lefties and 843 OPS, has homered a lot more against righties and gotten, obviously, a lot more plate appearances against him. That's a guy, to me, that could be your bopper in that situation, and a place where if you take on the contract, you might not have to give up a ton in terms of prospects.
Yeah, I'm not as sold there as you might be. I think that it gets into taking on the thing I don't understand is and I'm sorry to harp on the Teoscar stuff, but why are they okay going 6, maybe 7 years to get Bregman at probably an AAV that's going to come close to, if not exceed, 30 million, and you couldn't do a shorter deal and buy time to develop another right-handed power bat and have Teoscar as a guy who's got some postseason experience, as a guy who I think would have some leadership qualities in the room, maybe not as obvious as those of Bregman's, but I think it would have been a positive. Why are you willing to go double the length and more AAV on a player who seems to be in decline and who is going to be, no matter how good a defender he is, playing out of position? He has not played second base in the big leagues. If he has, it's a late inning defensive shift for an inning here or there. He's played some short, but he has not played second base. And while he's a good athlete and a good defender at third and can probably make the jump, it just seems like they're bending over backwards, if indeed they're in on Bregman, while slamming the door on a more logical fit.
That remains the number one fit that the Red Sox have, the secondary fit. Parsing through Craig Breslow's comments yesterday, right-handed bat remains the focus. I do want to note, he said that right-handed bat could come from within, whether Campbell steps up, whether Trevor Story, has a good year and is your centerpiece, which I think is still possible. I don't think Rafael is going to be the guy at the bottom of your lineup, or Vaughn Grissom. They are light on right-handed options. We know that. The secondary part he talked about, the bullpen. The bullpen is an area they've addressed with Aroldis Chapman and Justin Wilson. They did not get their annual Rule 5 pick, but they do have, as we've talked about, a lot of guys that are possible there. Hendricks, Slayton, all the guys we've talked about. This is an area, Sean, where You talk about, financial muscle. You talk about the fact they haven't spent, maybe going over the luxury tax threshold. I still think they have, 25, 26 million to spend before getting to that level. This is an area where I feel like, the market has not moved at the high end, which suggests that those pitchers are not getting what they thought. This might be kind of a market correction for, prior years where these guys got paid really well. And so you have, and it's a long list, but a pretty good list in terms of, high value relievers you have out there. Jeff Hoffman and Tanner Scott at the very top. Kirby Yates, David Robertson, Kenley Jansen, who's not coming back, Chris Martin, AJ Minter, Carlos Estevez, Jose Leclerc. All these guys, you can go down the list of guys who would be, pretty good. Spencer Turnbull, some of these other pieces that, have had pretty good years. But I think that elite crop, if you were really to kind of boil it down to, three or four guys, is Scott, Hoffman, Estevez, Minter, and Yates are probably your top five there.
Yeah,
That seems like
I wouldn't put Estevez and Minter in that top group. I would say it's Yates, Scott, and Hoffman are kind of in
yeah,
a class, and Scott being the best of those three.
right.
I had somebody from a National League team tell me last week that Scott was looking for 4 times 20. You remember that I said at the end of the season that Scott would end up with something closer to what Hader got with Houston a couple of years ago. That's probably still going to be the case, and I'm okay with that. People are, well, you can't pay a closer 20 million. You just paid one of them 16 million in each of the last two.
Right.
And if
And
you're
Hader was 5 for 95 by the way.
right. So I'm acknowledging that Scott is, for now at least, looking for a little bit more AAV, 20 versus 19, and he's willing to go a year fewer. I'm okay with the Red Sox making that kind of commitment. Again, this is only money. It's not a pick. He didn't get a QO because he got dealt at the deadline, so he's ineligible to receive one. I mean, they would have as deep and as formidable a bullpen as any team in the American League. Yankees got Devin Williams. That's a big upgrade for them. They were uncertain who their closer was going to be as recently as, August and September before changing up and deciding to experiment a little bit. They went out and got Devin Williams, one of the handful of best closers in the game. To me, the Red Sox have to have an upgrade there. I don't think Chapman is going to close. We don't know about the availability of somebody like Hendricks. We don't know about the ability of someone like Slayton in his second year to handle the ninth inning. Tanner Scott's done it, and there's a track record there, and the stuff is really good. Give yourself another pitching edge by improving the bullpen. And again, spending the money you keep saying you will spend, and that it's time to make this team more competitive. There are answers out there for them, and they don't seem to be seizing them.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, I know we've talked about handedness. They've, added lefties, so they have now Chapman and Wilson locked in with, Bernardino and Penrod kind of in the mix as well. I know Scott's one of those guys that's too good to characterize as just a lefty, but he is left-handed. To me, Jeff Hoffman is the guy I would go after, and he makes a lot of sense. Is really like a valuable righty. So imagine one of those guys. You add one of those two to Hendricks, Chapman, Slayton, Justin Wilson will make the roster, and then you have all these options that can go, up and down theoretically.
Kelly,
Weissert, Bernardino, Fulmer, Winkowski, who's a guy you could see maybe in a long role, as Breslow acknowledged yesterday. Criswell, Penrod, who throws really hard. Brian Mata's in the mix. Isaiah Campbell's in the mix, so you don't know what you can get. Luis Guerrero, obviously Zach Kelly, Wyatt Mills maybe coming back. Giovanni Moran, who they got the other day. Like, there's a lot of hard throwing options, good options in that group. And every time you add somebody elite, it takes the pressure off a guy like Luis Guerrero to come up after a handful of major league, appearances. Or we saw last year, how much did they use in important games, Zach Kelly and Cam Boozer, who, both have injury history and hit the wall hard, right? You need more guys than they've had. And I think that, every addition pushes everybody to a more comfortable place on the roster. But I do think, the options are definitely there, right? Even if it's
Yep.
Chris Martin coming back, but I think even an upgrade over that, a guy who's younger, multi-year option, whether it be Estevez, whether it be Hoffman, Scott, Minter, another lefty, doesn't fit perfectly with all the lefties you have, but I think that is where they go next. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that seems, through what Breslow said yesterday, to be, the two areas of need the most: right-handed bat and bullpen. One interesting thing he said: doesn't seem like they're really in the market for a backup catcher, other than maybe some depth on a minor league signing. That is a big vote of confidence in Carlos Narvaez, who I do not know much about. I don't think you know much about. But they like the profile, they like the receiving skills, and it looks like he's going to be the guy, kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, and the fact that I mean I don't dislike having him as your backup option, but he's not proven. And this is no longer, oh, by June 1st, Kyle Teal's going to be the guy anyway.
Right.
That scenario is gone. To me, signing someone like Narvaez or trading for someone like Narvaez made more sense before Teal got traded, because you could say, well, we just need a veteran guy who can catch and throw to give Wong some time off. But we all know that Teal's going to be the guy 4 or 5 times a week come June 1st. Well, that's not the case now. And not only is it not the case, there's nobody on the horizon that is going to be a major league contributor behind the plate. No one's thinking that Hickey is going to be a guy that catches at the big league level. At best, he's probably a platoon DH first base type, some weak skills defensively. So where is the path forward here when it comes to catching and depth? It doesn't seem like there's a lot in reserve from two guys who are, let's face it, pretty highly flawed at the major league level for different reasons.
And I think, you look at the free agent market, and this is another one where, kind of like the O'Neill thing, the timing hurts them, where, if they were to know they were going to trade Teal and go out and sign, I don't know who you would think the best options are out there, and if these were overpays, but Higashioka or,
Travis
resign
d'Arnaud.
d'Arnaud, something like that. Like that, those types of moves on a 1 or 2 year deal would make a lot of sense, but they had Teal and they couldn't. And then by the time, Teal was traded, all those options were off the market. It's a light market now. James McCann, Yasmani Grandal, Elias Diaz, maybe you see one of those guys if they take a minor league deal. For now, it is that mix of Wong and Narvaez with our friend Mickey Gasper off to greener pastures in Minnesota. We'll get to one or two more things from Breslow yesterday. 25-minute Zoom call. Some interesting things he said. I think, the most interesting of all being kind of where they're going next. And also the six-man rotation, which we can touch on briefly. It feels like every team flirts with this, and then they realize in practice that it doesn't actually work. I think that I've said this, and it's not I always couch it with, we're not rooting for this, and we're not telling you who and when, but, if you think the Red Sox have 7 good starters right now, well, 2 of them are going to be hurt, and one probably significantly hurt by the end of April, right? And maybe Giolito's not back. Maybe one of these guys gets dead arm in spring training. Like, it's just, on paper, 6 starters looks possible. Every team is struggling to put together 5. But I guess, the fact that it is in consideration now shouldn't be a surprise with the guys they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's saying that sort of pro forma, like, well, we're not closing the door on any solutions, which is what every young baseball executive hired in the last 10 years says. You don't want to shut the door on anything. But how workable is a six-man rotation for an extended period of time? You've already had Giolito come out and say, and he's a guy that would, in theory, benefit from a six-man, having missed all of last year. He's already saying, I like the rhythm and the routine of going every 5 days. It'd be one thing to give them the extra day early on when there are off days in the schedule, but to slot in a 6th guy. And look, let's remember too, you're limited to 13 pitchers. You can't take more than 13. If you have a 6-man rotation, you're down to 7 available relievers. That seems like a lot until go look at your average box score from last year and see how many times they and other teams used five, six, seven relievers in a game.
Hmm.
It's nice to have that guy you can stretch out, but because you're always having him in waiting, you can't necessarily use him as a reliever when he's not dropping in to give you some extra rest for your starters. So it's a hard thing to navigate. As you said, it sounds good in theory. It is not always workable in practice.
The two other things I want to touch on, and both of them I think bad looks in different ways for the Red Sox. First, we'll touch on Roki Sasaki, then we'll get to the Triston Casas comment from yesterday, which was hilarious. Roki Sasaki has narrowed his list. He's met with a few different teams. The Red Sox have not gotten a meeting. Every player has their particular things they look for, particular things they might want. Um, I'm trying to find a way in which this is not a bad look for the Red Sox that they didn't get a meeting with him because they put in a ton of effort. We know that Craig Breslow went to Japan. We know they were loading up, potentially having Daisuke and Koji and Junichi Tozawa and all these guys, as your kind of test cases on why this might work. And he looked at teams on both coasts and the Mets, the Yankees, Dodgers, Giants, Padres, ones in the middle, Cubs and Rangers, and said, I'll meet with all of you. Sure, yes, but he has not to this point had a meeting with the Red Sox, and based on the comments from his agent, Joel Wolfe, last night on a Zoom call, it seems like he might meet with one or two more, but probably not. He probably has met with the teams that are really in the mix. So, it's going to take a Hail Mary miracle for the Red Sox to land this guy. And considering how much we heard about how much they wanted him, the fact that they weren't even at the table, I find it hard to characterize as anything but kind of a pretty bad look.
It's an indictment of them. Let's get right to it because to reiterate, this is not about money. This is not how many hundreds of millions of dollars are you going to spend.
Twitter told me it was
and
about
you could probably
money.
Have some cynical cheap. Red Sox fans out there saying, you could probably have Red Sox fans out there saying that they won't pay for him. That's not the case here. Nobody is going to give this guy more than a little more than $7 million. The range is very small. His own agent, Joel Wolfe, at the winter meeting said, this is not going to be decided by money. Now, when an agent is saying that, you better listen because they would never otherwise say that. Because you are limited to what your international free agent signing pool is to spend on this guy. So it's not about money. And as you noted, because he met with the Yankees and Mets, it's not about avoiding super big media markets, and it's not about avoiding the East Coast and staying on the West Coast, as many Japanese players tend to do, if for no other reason than geography and proximity to home. So he's willing to play for a big market team. He's willing to play on the East Coast, but he doesn't want to meet with you, and money's not the issue. What does that leave? You're not good enough, or you're not good enough yet. Although I will say that it's somewhat mysterious that he has given the same cold shoulder to the Philadelphia Phillies, another East Coast big market team who are a hell of a lot better positioned right now than the Red Sox are.
I think he did to the Braves too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a real chance here that it's all performative and that he's between the Dodgers and Padres, but wanted to just fly out the Mets and Yankees for the hell of it. But still, it's not a positive development for the Boston Red Sox. I don't think there's any way to slice that. And the last thing, Craig Breslow's comments yesterday on Tristan Casas got a lot of play, as they should. They were as follows. He was kind of passionate about this and talking about, and I wasn't sitting there screaming and pounding the table, but he was, a little bit kind of, not fiery, but a little tick under that. I'm not really totally sure where it comes from, Breslow said when asked about the Casas trade rumors. We're not shopping Tristan. We see him as a guy that can hit in the middle of the lineup for a really long time here in Boston. Obviously, has plus power, plus strike zone judgment, the ability to get on base. And it's someone that I don't think we've seen the best of. He obviously missed a number of months during the season. We're really excited for him to be completely healthy, yada, yada, yada. When you have really good players, I don't think it's surprising that other teams would ask about them, but I've seen some of the speculation about what deals may or may not have existed or what may or may not have been proposed, there was nothing that was remotely close. We're certainly not shopping him. I don't think that Craig Breslow sent out an email to all 29 other GMs and said Tristan Casas can be had for the best bid. He's not being shopped in that sense. But when they were looking for starting pitchers and they were looking for good starting pitchers, and they got two of them in Crochet and Bueller, they tried on Luis Castillo and some other people. You're damn sure that Tristan Casas was a guy they were willing to move. We've heard that. We've seen that from so many different reports. The Seattle talks, different things. And you know what? Like, it's just kind of a weird thing to get your back up about, because it's fine. No one's really blaming you, despite some fans loving Casas and not wanting him moved, for entertaining all possibilities for making your team better. But to do it and then be, oh, we would never, I think it's a little disingenuous.
Yeah, that's a perfect word for it. I was going to use front office speak or semantics. We're not shopping him, but we're also not taking a giant step backward in horror when other teams ask about him, and in fact, they're willing to engage teams. And we can sit here and argue about the actual definition of shopping. That would, to me, entail calling teams and unsolicited advising them that Tristan Casas is very much available. Maybe they're not doing that, but it's common knowledge within the industry that they'll at least engage on Casas, and I agree with you too, which they should. It doesn't mean I think they should move him, but you never know what someone might offer you for him, and you're best off leaving your options open, entertaining what has to be proposed, and making the decision to assemble your roster the best you can going forward. If that means giving up Tristan Casas because what's being offered can't be refused, okay. Yeah, it should be a high bar. He's 24, 25 years old with a huge ceiling, the ability to maybe hit 35 or 40 home runs up here. He's got plate discipline. There's a lot to like about him, but it doesn't mean that you can't listen to what other teams have to say and what they want to propose. And to get all high and mighty about, I don't know where this is coming from, is kind of too cute by half.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I don't know what that phrase means, but we'll move on. The Dave Dombrowski refrain on something like this was always so unbelievably stupid and hilarious, but also pretty accurate in the way that GM should be thinking about it. It was always, and I'm not going to do the impression because my voice doesn't have it in it today, but, I'm never going to say never. I would never trade Miguel Cabrera in Detroit, but what if you offered me two Miguel Cabreras? Like, okay,
A little
that's
bit of the impression there.
a little bit. Yeah. That's, I think, the way that you should look at it when you're in that seat. What if Pittsburgh, I know they're pretty much set in the rotation here, but what if Pittsburgh calls today and says, we'll do Skeens for Casas? Like, okay, done deal, right?
Not going to happen, but
no, but just,
in the event it did, you can't say we would under no circumstances trade Tristan Casas,
right,
because guess what? Yes, you would.
Yeah,
you would pull that trigger so fast. Not that
he said that, but he was kind of saying it. And I think, I do think if there's a reason behind that, it's messaging to the player through the media, trying to get that message to Tristan Casas. Whether he's done that privately, I don't know, but about saying like, hey, we are not trying to trade you. We're not trying to trade you. These guys don't know what they're talking about when they did, in fact, talk about him for Castillo, talked about him and Yoshida for Castillo. We'll end there. What do you think of that? Would you have done that, Tristan Casas and Masataka Yoshida for Luis Castillo deal?
I would think long and hard about it. I thought a Castillo for Casas straight up made no sense. But if you could unload most of Yoshida's salary there, then that certainly makes you think a little bit harder. I'm down somewhat on Castillo, and he's a guy I've always liked. I think he's kind of a bulldog. I like that. But look at the road numbers last year. Take him out of the very spacious T-Mobile Park in Seattle, and his ERA was a full run higher at about 4.4. That worries me going forward. A couple of years ago, yeah, give me Luis Castillo all day, but I think he's starting to go down the wrong side of the hill there, and I'd be reluctant to give up Casas for him.
Yeah, I've talked about wanting the Red Sox to move on from Yoshida for like every podcast we've recorded since like July, and I think they're a more functional and better team without him on it. I think the path to somebody like Teoscar or Tyler O'Neill, Grichuk, whoever you could name, is a lot easier without Yoshida on your roster. But using Casas as a way to make that happen is kind of a, you know, you're just fixing a mistake from the past with potentially another mistake moving on from that guy. So we can't criticize them for the moves they didn't make, but we'll find a way here on the Fenway Rundown. That's the last one of the year. We will be back later in the week with another episode, hoping to land a guest that is on my to-do list here on New Year's Eve. But again, Happy New Year to everybody at home. We appreciate you listening throughout the year.